Welcome to Flashpoint, the Fire Inside podcast, featuring leadership and team building principles designed to ignite your inner fire. Now your host, international speaker and best-selling author, Frank Viscuso.
I love it. I'm here with Paul Combs, my buddy. I often say this, Paul. I often say when people say, what did you want to be when you grow up? I say Paul Combs. And it's true because
I never say Frank Viscuso. I'm sorry.
I'm sure you don't, but I know that you know this about me, that I went to school. I wanted to be either an artist or a filmmaker or something in that area. My dad told me when I came home from a break, he told me, it'd be pretty smart to take the fire test because your brother's taking it and you have something to fall back on. And by the way, that tells you something about my dad. He was always that guy that said, go after what you want, but have a backup plan.
Right.
And in some areas of life, that was a good thing for me. In some areas of life, that was a bad thing because I'm always thinking of that. There's always that backup plan,
right.
Instead of just selling out to something. But when I see you and your artwork, which is a tremendous gift, and like I've said before, it's a gift from God, but you give us a gift back and what you do with that. I look at that and I say, well, there's something about that I wish I had pursued some of that in my life, but that's why partnering with you with this project has been so awesome. So welcome onto the podcast and thanks.
Well, thank you. Thank you. And and something, because I've actually had the privilege of seeing some of the stuff you've drawn, is people don't know that you're actually a very good artist yourself.
You know what?
You don't share it with the world, but you do have a lot of talent.
I have some talent. It's funny. We're going to talk about a lot of things here, and I know we're going to talk about Sprinkles and the children's book that we put together. But there is something that you bring that up. It's funny because my son, I just dropped him off at school, and as we're going off to school, I look down and there's this book that my son, who's now 10, but when he was 9, he had written this book. Let me tell the story. You know it, but I want to tell it for listeners. He comes home. He says, "Dad, I wrote a book." I said, "Really?" He goes, "Yeah." And he hands me this book. He was actually 8, not 9. He says, I wrote this book called Banana and Avocado. I said, "Let me see it." So he gives me, and it's just lined paper, and it's the story about a banana and an avocado, and it's cute. It's really cute. And he says to me, "Do you think it could be a real book one day?" Now, being a guy that has written many books that started with here and became real, started with my mind, I said, "Absolutely, it could be a real book." He's like, "Do you really think so?" I said, "I do." And what he didn't know was every day he went to school, I actually started illustrating the book. And, by the time, and this is actually the cover of that book, Banana and Avocado. Awesome. And I'm no Paul Combs, but what was cool about it was, and I just put this together through Shutterfly. We made about a couple dozen copies. And so he can hand to his teachers and his cousins and all that stuff, grandma and grandpa. But I wanted him to know what it feels like to create something from nothing. That was the whole goal. And that's what you do. Yeah. But where does it come from? Where does your drive come from to basically tell stories and give us this gift of your message through art?
It's funny. I get asked that all the time. And I don't know that I've ever come up with a really good answer other than the fact that art and creating to me is like breathing. I have never not been an artist. From my earliest point of childhood, I was drawing. I drew my first comic book when I was 4 years old. And it was a point where if there was paper around, I was always drawing. I was always creating, and I kind of always had that drive of always having that wanting to explore the world around me and soak it all in and try to, I'd see something even as a kid and I couldn't wait to get home and try to draw what I saw, and, where a lot of kids say, I want to be an artist when I grow up. I was always saying, I'm an artist. It was never, I'm going to be, even at the youngest age, I am an artist.
I love that. So you saw it long before it was a reality. You saw it and said, this.
I thought everybody was. I thought that's how the world, was, that everybody could draw and everyone could create, because that is just something, it just came so natural to me.
Yeah.
And it would, to the point to where, I was a horrible student in school because I could not, I hadn't learned at that point at that young of an age to be able to turn that creativity off. So even in school, I mean, I would see something funny, or I'd see something, the shadowing or the lighting in the room. And I just couldn't help. It was this compulsive nature to actually have to draw what I was seeing, because I couldn't listen to anything else until that part of my brain was taken care of. You know, and I guess now they call it ADHD and they medicate you, and, you know, well, but at that age, it was just a nonstop flood of creative juices.
I can understand that.
I still have.
Yeah, I can understand that better than you can imagine, because that was me too in high school. Yeah. And I mean, think about it. In high school, I would start every single year saying, all right, this year, I'm not going to get lost by day 3. This year, you know, but after 1 week, I'm going to be exactly where everybody else is, because that would tend to happen to me because I would daydream. And by day 3, I was already working on my 3rd piece of art, sitting in class, and I'm thinking, I don't know where we are with anything right now.
Right,
hoping
exactly.
I just, you know, so I get that.
Yeah, I mean, ink pens were spaceships, and I would be lost in a world.
Yeah.
You know, because that was just where I wanted to be. I didn't want to be sitting there learning math and English and history, and, you know, so I mean, it made me a terrible student, but I think having that perception at that early age made me the artist I am.
Yeah.
You know, because even today, I mean, and I know I've talked about it before, but I mean, I carry these books around with me, and they're just small little thumbnails, but this is how I function throughout the day. I keep books like this with me. I mean, if we leave the house, we go on dates with, you know, my wife and I go on dates, these books go with me, because I can't function unless I get that out of my head, because I've always got this awful fear that I'm going to forget the next great piece of artwork, you know, if I just try to remember it. So, yeah, I keep these books with me. I keep a sheet of paper beside me in the bed. And even in the darkest of night, I can reach over, grab a pen without even looking about it, and I can sketch something out on a piece of paper. And, yeah, you know, it's just a way of getting it out of my head.
Yeah, I do that too with writing. If I have an idea in my head, and if I don't get it, like I'm talking about 3 a.m., 4 a.m. I've spoke about this on a podcast before. If I don't take a notepad and write it down, first of all, I'll be up all night.
Yeah. And
then I'll probably forget what it was anyway. And I'll be thinking, what was that thought? It was a pretty good one. So I would imagine that happens to you as an artist as well.
Yeah.
Now, your books, Drawn by Fire, I love doing this. I've done this before, where I sat down with my firefighters. I had Drawn by Fire and Drawn by Fire 2. Mm-hmm. And for people who aren't familiar with them, they're illustrations with a couple of sentences that tell a great story, and about our profession in the fire service, because we're mm-hmm. both, you know, retired from the fire service. I would sit down with my firefighters and say, hey, a rainy day, maybe we trained a lot, physically trained a lot. So it's a rainy day. I'd say, all right, hey, today's going to be a different type of drill. This is what I want you to do. I want everybody to read these books. I want you to read every illustration, but I don't want you to read it and say which illustration is a message for someone else that I work with. I want this to be a self-reflective thing. I want you to look at it and say, which one is speaking to me? Right. About the guy that doesn't wear the seatbelt, or the guy that's lazy or complacent, or the guy that's making decisions based off fear or greed or ego, whatever it may be. And, you know, I travel throughout the country, and I go to firehouses all the time. I don't know that I've ever been to a firehouse where there is not a Paul Combs cartoon or illustration hanging up on a wall. And 90% of the time, maybe 50% of the time, let's be fair, 50% of the time, the message is a positive message saying, hey, let's remember this. And 50% of the time, it's because they're putting it there because they're trying to send a message to someone they work with.
Right.
You know what I'm saying by that?
Oh, yeah.
So have you had a situation in your life where you've had some negative responses from your artwork? Most of it's positive and beautiful and awesome. Right.
Yeah. Yeah. It doesn't come often, but when it does come, some of them can be funny. I know a lot of folks that follow me on Facebook know that I put up the fan mail occasionally, you know, and, you know, and it's funny because, you know, when it all comes right down to it, as an editorial cartoonist, I'm a professional smartass. So don't get into that argument with me, because I'm going to win and I'm going to have a lot of fun doing it. It's kind of like those Three Stooges skits. You poke them in the eye and you run. So, you get these things, and people, and I get it that, with an editorial cartoon, within a few seconds, if I've done my job correctly, it's going to have some type of an impact. Yeah. And it's going to hit you somehow emotionally. It's either going to make you funny, make you mad, make you think. And a lot of times the negative feedback that I get is just an emotional outburst, and it's something that probably somebody would never say to my face, or they wouldn't say the day after. But at that moment, they're mad. It's hit them kind of funny. And they lash out. Well, sometimes the lash out is just a ridiculous response. Yeah. And I have some fun with that, but there's other times where, it's a very good argument. I'll tell people often that I am not the sharpest crayon in the box. And sometimes, I do miss an obvious point in one of the cartoons, and the argument they have is very legitimate. And I love to have that conversation with people, that I didn't see something from a perspective that maybe I should have. But there are other times where people are just lashing out the lash out, and you know how it is on social media, and everyone's an expert and everyone's a critic. And
well, yes, and on that note, I have seen how you have posted some of those negative, fan mail. Yeah, I didn't want to call it fan mail. Yeah, is it a fan mail? But that negative mail that you receive, and your replies back to them. And I watch this and I say, man, this guy, he's balanced. He's got a great perspective in life, because he cannot take this to heart. See, I remember when there were 25 reviews for Step Up and Lead on, it might've been Amazon.com. And I go and I read them, and 24 of them. I mean, the majority of them are amazing. And people are saying really nice things I didn't anticipate. And then there's that one.
Right.
And it's that one negative one. And I'll tell you this, I remember what he wrote. He wrote, this book is not very well written. I wouldn't read it unless it's on your promotional list. All this guy's doing is regurgitating stuff he read elsewhere. If you want a real leadership book, read something by John Maxwell or Stephen Covey.
Right.
And it was like a dagger in my heart. And as I'm looking at this, reading this, my wife walks into the room and she could see on my face, she's like, what's wrong? Because I'm that guy, right? I said, read this. She reads it. She goes, that's awesome. I said, awesome. What's awesome about that? She goes, it's the first time anyone ever put you in a sentence with John Maxwell and Stephen Covey.
That's great.
I said, no, that's perspective.
That's great.
But that moment taught me a little bit about dealing with criticism. The funniest thing about that story is there was a reply button. And being an Italian from New Jersey, we like to reply.
Right.
But what I said was, I answered it the exact way I talk about how to deal with critics in Step Up and Lead. I wrote, I'm sorry my book didn't meet your expectations, but thank you for your feedback. Unhappy customers are our greatest source for learning. He replies back. He says, wow, I didn't expect you to read this or to respond the way you did. Thank you. We need more leaders like you. I'm thinking, read my book again.
Right. Yeah. It's one of those things where it's hard not to get pulled down into the mud.
Right.
And even if you're responding to critics, it's important to know not to sink down to their level. I mean, it's okay to respond with somebody, and it's okay to respond with emotion at times, but you can't sink down to their level. And that's something that I do try to do. Even though I'm poking them in the eye, I never try to sink down to their level. They're going to be critics. I've got people that hate me I have never met, and they hate me.
I find that hard to believe, but I know I understand where you're coming from, because again, you are in a profession where you will bring emotion out of people. And I get that. Where does an idea for an illustration come from? Is it one of these things where you see someone doing something that you're like, you shouldn't be doing that, I'm going to illustrate that? Or is it more like just life experiences, something just pops into your head out of whatever, something you watched on TV, somebody you saw down the street do something?
It comes from a lot of different directions. And like I said about, when I was even younger, of just being receptive to all these different channels coming in. Just kind of using the fire cartoons as an example. It can happen from, something that I've witnessed when I was on the department, being retired now for a year and a half. But when I was on the job, I would see something that that would be okay. That's something that I'm going to, I put it, I mentally draw it and stick it in in a folder somewhere. Or it could be being at a conference and being in a class such as yours. And it's one word among thousands that you say within an hour or 2 hours. And that one word will end up as, so they're fairly new books, so I got to find them, is an entire page.
Right.
Because I will take that concept and fire it off into different perspectives. And how do does that fit tactically? Does that fit into leadership? Does that fit into people? Where does that message fit? And all those things start to come out as images. When I'm in a conference or I'm in a class, this is how I take notes. I'm not writing out bullet points. These things fire out of my head as small little thumbnail images and metaphors and that sort of thing. So it's frustrating at times. I've told people before that it's a blessing and a curse to have those antenna always up and always scanning for something. Because sometimes you just can't turn it off. Well, it can be frustrating, but I love the fact that I can take something like that and be able to express that in a lot of different ways.
You have the creative outlet and a way to do that. That's when I go and I speak, I often tell people my class is never the same class twice, because the principles are the same, but the stories are different, because it's based on what's happening at that point in my life. And I'm so grateful to have that outlet to be able to express myself. It's like yesterday, we're recording this on 5/20/2021. Yesterday, a pitcher for the Yankees just pitched a no-hitter. And this is what I'm thinking. This is the 6th no-hitter of the year. And I think my belief is we had 6 no-hitters this year already because they changed the way that batters are thinking. They're thinking about launch angles. They're thinking about exit velocity. And they're not thinking about just put the bat on the ball, put the ball in play, and let's get on base. Right. They're trying to get their numbers up here and there. And because of that, maybe they're missing more balls. And I'm thinking about that and how I can apply that to one of the lessons that I teach and in my classes, because I use real life experiences to teach. And that kind of makes me feel like that's probably what you do. Yeah. I see this, let me illustrate it. Because what I like about you is you do the fire service cartoons, you do the editorial cartoons, but you do sometimes you just have an idea like the band made of the dogs. What do you call them? The rock dogs? I don't know what you call them actually.
Yeah, rock dogs.
Yeah, right.
Yeah,
so that comes out and you just creatively have this moment where you're making this amazing art. You never know where it'll lead.
Right.
But I love that. And by the way, those illustrations are awesome. I know you sell them,
thank you.
Right?
I do sell them. And it's one of those things where, I tend not to do things unless I have an ending in mind. And that's something we'll actually talk about when we start talking about the book. But it's every once in a while, a project like Rock Dogs will start and I have no idea where it goes. It's just something that I want to do. It's something I'm just having fun doing, ended up being, I think I ended up completing like 4 or 5 of those, just fun, but it's funny you mentioned the Yankees, and it's just a fun story because I know you and I both love baseball. You coach baseball, and you and I talk baseball all the time. And it's funny that you mentioned about the Yankees no-hitter because the night before a Tiger pitcher had a no-hitter.
That's right.
And no one knew about it. It was a small little blip, of news. And the Yankees pitcher throws a no-hitter. And I get a text from AP News talking about how the Yankee pitcher has pitched the 6th no-hitter of the year. Like, you got to be kidding me, right?
I knew about yours.
You and I we don't disagree on much, but we disagree on baseball teams. So
no, I hear
how much I hate the Yankees.
I know that. Well,
it's jealousy.
I hear you, brother. I totally get it. The evil empire.
Oh, the evil empire, and it's all jealousy. I just wish the Tigers had a third of that success.
No. Well, I knew about the no-hitter if it makes you feel better.
Okay, good. Well, it does a little. Because I thought me and my daughter may have been the only 2.
That's great. That's great. Well, listen, you mentioned a book a moment ago. Let's talk about the book, because one of the things you just said, when you start, you never know where it's going to end up. That's my writing style too. I mean, I've written now 8 books, published books. I have about 3 or 4 sitting on my computer that, aren't published yet. But when I start a book, especially a novel, which I've written one called The Mentor and another one is a manuscript right now called Ink Spots, but even Sprinkles. When I start writing it, I don't know where it's going to go.
Right.
I just start with this. Maybe it's a scene from somewhere in that book pops into my head. Like I've written screenplays where a specific scene popped into my head. I wrote that scene first, then I had to do the half hour before and then the hour after that scene. But it was that scene that was the whole, I guess, catalyst for it.
Mm-hmm.
With Ink Spots, I start this story and 30 days later, I have a finished story. Sprinkles is a children's book. Now, with Sprinkles, I remember I was sick. I remember I had I think I had a stomach ache. I don't remember what it was. I just wasn't feeling well. But I remember being sick. I remember sitting in my house, turning on my computer, and I sit down and I start writing this story about Sprinkles and how he wanted to be a fire dog. And the thing about this little dog was, as I start writing it, there's all these challenges he has to overcome that come down to physical limitations, self-doubt, and a critical corner mutts that are there to tell him he's not good enough, strong enough, fast enough, brave enough to be able to do what he wants. Now, when I tell that part of the story to people, they often tell me that doesn't sound like a children's book. It sounds like an everybody's life book. I said, that's right. So when people say to me, what age is the book for? I don't know how to tell them. This book is for 40-year-olds too. It's not just for 4-year-olds. But I'll share this with you that that book was written more than 20 years ago. And it's not that I ever forgot about it. I just never really thought much about it. And throughout the years, I had some books published. Every now and then I'd think about Sprinkles. But it wasn't until I was at work one day and my parents were opening up a time capsule. Now, I don't know if anybody else does this that's listening to this, but my family, not just my parents and brothers and sisters, or brother and sisters, but my cousins, aunts, uncles, we would put a time capsule together. And every 20 years or so, open a PVC pipe with a cap on it, open it up, and pull everything out that was in there. There'd be videotapes in there. And with technology, you have to find something to play this stuff on. And there'd be pictures, there'd be all this stuff in there. And so I'm at work one day, and my wife and my two boys, my two youngest, go with my family. They open up the time capsule. When I show up at home the next day, my wife says, you have to read this to your boys. I said, read what? She goes, this was in the time capsule. And it was Sprinkles the fire dog.
Right.
And I look at it, the original one that I wrote, and I'm thinking, I haven't seen this on paper in forever. And I sit my boys down on the couch. I start reading them the story, and I become emotional because I suddenly realize, holy cow, when I wrote this, I was more like that young, insecure puppy than I thought. And what I've been able to achieve in my life, I feel like, man, this has all come full circle. So I go to Nicholas's school about a week later, and they have the mystery reader. And I bring a book in, just a regular children's book, but I also bring Sprinkles in. I read the book to the kids, and then I take these sheets of paper, which Sprinkles is just written, it's not a book, and then I read Sprinkles to them. And they loved the story of Sprinkles. And all they wanted to talk about was that story instead of the other one. And I showed them this, and I said, this is how a book starts. Right. It starts like this before it becomes one like this. And it was a year later that my son came home and said, Daddy, I wrote a book. But I'm sharing all that with you because that was even probably 4 years before you and I started speaking about Sprinkles. Right. And I remember approaching you about this book and this idea, thinking the greatest thing on the planet Earth for me, and I'm not even kidding you, with regards to this book, would be if Paul Combs illustrated it. And I thought it's probably a long shot. We're friends. We're good friends. We've worked on projects before. So I'm going to propose the idea. But when I proposed it to you, I didn't know what your response was going to be. But what was your initial thought when you read it?
Hell no.
I love it.
Well, and it's because I've never seen myself as a children's book illustrator. You know, that I always thought my work was too bold, or there was an edginess to the work, because I'd been an editorial cartoonist so long, even, as a syndicated political cartoonist, that I never thought my work would ever translate over. And I'd been approached by other authors, with their stories, and I've turned them down for decades. And I just didn't want to be a children's book illustrator because I didn't think that I could ever fit in that realm. And I know that you and I talked about it the first time, and I was like, oh, okay, let me see. And, what I mean, I kind of give you a passive aggressive response if I recall. But there was something about, once I read the story, and to me, what really started kind of luring me in a little bit were the corner mutts. Because I have always been that guy that hates a bully. Yeah. My fights in high school were always standing up for somebody. And sometimes I won and sometimes I lost. But it was always standing up for somebody that was being bullied or someone was being pushed around. And so what really started getting me was Sprinkles being bullied by the corner mutts. And it just kept coming back and kept coming back. And I kept thinking about it, and then you and I talked a few more times and I started getting a little bit more excited about it. But and I don't know how much you want to get into the process of this, but as you know, I mean, it took a long time for me to kind of get from point A to point D and weave my way through there to actually get to where we are with this finished book.
Yeah.
Because, everything from artistically to the mood of it to I'd never illustrated a book like this. I'm used to telling a story in one panel. I've never told a story over 25 spreads, that we had to do for the book. So, I mean, this was a big uphill learning curve for me. Just everything from creative process to battling my own corner mutts in my head.
I want to talk about the creative process. I want to talk about how this, maybe we could start by the first, concepts of what we thought Sprinkles should look like, because I wrote the story, but when you said, what do we want him to look like? There's certain characteristics he had that's explained in the book. But for me, it was like, well, you do your thing and we'll talk about it. So maybe we could show some of them.
Yeah. So I'm going to share my screen.
And for those of you that are looking at me and can see this, if you're watching this on video, the illustration behind me is part of an illustration from this book. So we can maybe talk about that a little later, but there it is.
Yeah. So this was these, and in reality, these are only about an inch tall. And these were just small little concept doodles that I was doing of what I thought maybe Sprinkles would look like. And again, I think you can really kind of see a little bit more of an editorial cartoon style coming out in this. And he doesn't come to me, I guess he just doesn't have the personality that I thought he needed to have.
Right.
So did I ever share this with you?
These two I never saw. I saw another one.
Because I think you and I talked about it. And so this is the one that I sent to you. This is the first one that I actually fleshed out of what Sprinkles might look like.
And I remember thinking, well, this dog looks like he's too confident. And I remember thinking that, like, this dog looks like he's already somebody who can kind of handle bullies. And I'm thinking this looks like Sprinkles 5 years later. That's what I kind of thought.
And I think that was what you even texted me that day.
I may have.
Yeah. So, I mean, so the evolution process kind of went from that more of a Cartoon Network even style of dog to of a more realistic dog. And what we ended up with was the very first style sheet that we created for Sprinkles. And this is the style that we would use throughout the book. And if you can even see up in the upper right-hand corner there, it's dated 12/1/19. So that gives the viewers a little bit of an idea of the long drawn out process this was, as me as an artist being able to kind of convey what I wanted this image to be, because I knew that the story was phenomenal and I knew it kept drawing me in. What I didn't want to do was provide, I guess, illustrations that didn't match the impact of the story.
Right.
And I knew we had an opportunity to do something very, very special, especially within the fire service, but maybe, in the general public as well, of creating a book that not only had a phenomenal message, but also had artwork that kind of, it laid the foundation for that message.
Right.
So I mean, the words are laid onto the art. So the art is the foundation for the power of the word. And that's kind of how I had to look at it. But yeah, this is our first style sheet.
And this, when you sent this to me, my immediate response was, that's him. That's Sprinkles. I mean, you've captured that character better than I could possibly imagine. I remember showing it to my wife, showed it to my sisters, showed it to my brother, showed it to my parents, saying, hey, remember that story, Sprinkles? They all remembered it.
Right.
And I said, this is him. And I remember them saying, who drew this? And I told them it was Paul Combs, and he's going to illustrate the book. And they said, when's it going to come out? I'm like, I don't know. I don't know. Because I don't think Paul's ready to illustrate it yet.
Right.
But that was the process for me. For me, it was like, I have a very good friend who had asked his wife out on a date. I think he says 15 times before she actually said yes. I felt like that with you with this book. I'm like, I know, okay, I know he's going to draw it. I know he's going to illustrate it. I just don't know when. It's got to be on his time. But I get that, because I have to do things on my time frame too. So I understand that.
Well, and I mean, if I were to start a children's book today, it would be a much quicker process, because I've already kind of set, again, a foundation for myself on how I want, to actually approach this. But if I would have started the day after I created this style sheet, we would not have the book we have today. It would look completely different. I mean, just creatively and in life and everything else, I had to kind of get there and understand visually how I wanted, even the viewer to portray this or see this book. Because I know a lot of people haven't seen the book in its entirety, but one of the things you and I talked about is we didn't want it one perspective.
Right.
Is that we wanted a lot of these scenes to be from Sprinkle's point of view. You were down on the ground with him, and some of the scenes are above, so throughout the book, you're looking at different perspectives of this city. Even speaking of the city.
Yeah. If you could show
how you
that
draw that. To do. Yeah, absolutely. I guess this is kind of a progression of the character, as we kind of talked about, starting with the end in mind. And this was actually the first illustration that I did, just kind of a concept piece of Sprinkles. It's funny that I always knew that the last spread or the last image of this would be Sprinkles getting his dream come true. His fulfillment of being able to ride on that big red fire engine. And it was just a matter of how do I start the illustration process with the story to get him to this conclusion visually. This was the first concept that we drew up that at the time was probably going to be the cover. And that's that's the story, the character arc of even having this. Do we want to talk about this name tag at all, or do we want to wait?
We could actually, because it's interesting that you bring that up, because we were talking about names for characters, and the names for this other dog, which I don't even want to give it the story way of what the other dog is, except that was kind of where Sprinkles saw himself saying, I want to be like that one day. Mm-hmm. And we'll just kind of leave it at that. But we came up with the name Duffy. And we both agreed Duffy was a great name because of our good friend, Jim Duffy. Now, if Jim Duffy's listened to this and the book's not out yet and he doesn't have one, I want him to know we did change the dog's name.
Before he buys 40 copies to hand to the
yeah, we did. And it had nothing to do with not wanting to honor Jim Duffy. Right. It had to do with, we just came up with a more fire-related name, quite honestly. And that was because a friend of mine, Chief Greaser out in Texas, Flower Mound, Texas, had posted on social media his 2 Dalmatians and their names. And I thought, that's a cool name. Yeah. That's a really cool name. And that's when I reached out to you saying, what do you think about this? And we were thinking about other characters in the book.
Yeah,
and then
absolutely.
We decided to change this one. So I don't know if there's anything else you want to add to that. I feel like I just broke Jim Duffy's heart.
Yeah, I know. But we were thinking about you, brother. We love you.
Well, I also say this, and I will never shy away from telling the truth about this. Jim Duffy is the very first person out in Wallingford, Connecticut. He called me up and invited me out to come and speak and present step up and lead to his organization. He was the first one to call me, and I didn't even have a class. I wrote the book, but I didn't have a class. I just sent the proposal. They asked me to come in. I agreed to come in, and I had to quickly create something to go and present it. So he was the first one out of thousands of presentations, maybe not thousands, but it's been many hundreds of presentations, all started with Jim Duffy. So
and and my story with Jim is pretty similar. I mean, he told me for years that I should actually do a class and I should actually present and share more of this, and he has been that one person. I mean, he was in my very first FDIC class, and and he's always been one of my biggest supporters.
Yeah, I agree.
And at times when I've needed a critic, he's been one of my most positive critics. Which is, as you know, one of the most valuable friends you can have is a positive critic.
Well, because he's a great person, one of the times I saw him at FDIC and I say, Jim, every time I see you, you have a smile on your face. He says, you have to. And I thought, man, he's so right. You really do have to, because, how many times we get to go around on a planet, and this guy's figured out how to enjoy it. He just texted me the other day and I texted him back. He sent me pictures of where he was vacationing. I said, Jim, you are living life the right way. Yeah. And that guy really is. So I'm glad we had an opportunity to talk about him.
Okay. So let's
because I got this picture behind me of a city. Can you talk about the process of drawing the city?
So like I said, we knew that we were going to put sprinkles in the setting of a city. And, and the visuals that I had in my head is that he wouldn't be in the upper suburbs. He was going to be in the gritty part of the city. He was going to be in the not so nice part of the city. This is where this is where the mutts, this is where they thrive.
Yeah.
And so I kind of wanted the city to be one of the characters in the book. So as the book progresses through, you'll see different parts of the city. But and I was inspired by it a lot because I'm a Midwest guy, so I mean a lot of the reference shots that I used for this city all came from Toledo and Detroit, a little bit of Philadelphia in there.
Yeah.
So I definitely wanted the city to be part of one of the characters of the book and to have kind of a life of its own as well. And I guess the best way to do that is to start with the opening scene of the book. So if you look here, you got the white image there is actually the layout of the book. And because we went with a 9x9 book, and we talked about this earlier, not to have these as one-page illustrations, but a complete spread. So you get this full scene in front of you. So just to kind of talk about a little bit about the process of drawing these. So you start with the white as far as the format, and then I draw these perspective lines. And I kind of think about what perspective I want to be at as a viewer. Do I want to be down on the ground, or I want to be looking up at more of a bird's eye view? And so what we'd do is that I would actually go in and roughly block in what this city would look like.
Yeah.
Okay. And then from there, I would make sure I get these turned on correctly. Nope. Is I would go in and I would actually ink in the city. Turn these perspective lines off now. So there you get, it's kind of what is just the nitty gritty. This is the drawing that actually started this scene. And at that point, then I'd go in and I would actually paint the city. Now, this was all drawn and painted digitally.
That's what I wanted to ask you real quick. So like you draw, this isn't like I guess a computer program where you're like, hey, let's make this brick. You draw every brick by hand. Oh yeah. Everything is drawn by hand. I guess I can kind of zoom in on some of this, but you can see even kind of the detail. Yeah. All this is hand drawn. And the process of drawing and painting is no different than if I were doing it on I don't know if you can still see it sharing my screen, but my drawing board behind me. I can. It's just that I'm drawing on a digital canvas instead of a piece of paper. Right. So this was actually the drawn and painted city. And then I would, and talk about bringing your own character into it. You have a guitar hanging on your wall behind you right now. You have a guitar right there in a guitar store. Secondhand guitars. There you go. Yeah. Secondhand guitars.
And so, yeah, I mean, it's funny that you and I both we kind of inserted some different personalities within the book and some different things that are important to us. But so this was the actual city piece that was actually put in. And then I would go in and paint in street lights and people and cars. And the beautiful thing about doing this, especially digitally, is that within Photoshop, I can paint these and I can put everything on separate layers. So by the time that I put sprinkles in, and I'll actually put in, do you want to go ahead and share the first?
Sure. Yeah.
Whole thing. So, Sprinkles is a little puppy who lived in a big city. Sprinkles didn't have any family, and the big city was a lonely place for a little dog. And just by those words, those powerful words in that descriptor, I knew that I wanted this huge city scene and this little bitty dog in the scene, because I want you to feel just how big and intimidating the city can be for a little puppy. And that's how the city itself really becomes part of the story and one of the characters, is that you're either getting large city views or you're getting close-up views. But I really wanted the viewer to feel like they were in this city with Sprinkles.
Well, you did it. Now, how long does it take to do an illustration like that one there?
Once I finally got my legs and finally got an idea of the color palettes and everything that I wanted to use, I mean, this one illustration here took an entire week to complete. But by the time that I was getting toward the end of the book, and I illustrated these sequentially, was that I could finish one within a day and a half. And you're probably talking 12 to 13, 14 hours in each spread. But when I started, I mean, and I actually went back and because I would figure something out in spread 5, and I would have to go back and revise the previous 4 because of something that I'd figured out that I wanted to do.
Now, Paul, in my books and in my seminars, I talk about how something called the lane theory. And the concept behind the lane theory is when you're building a team, everybody has talent, everybody has skill, everybody has ability. What you have to do is find out what people are good at, put them in that lane, and get out of their way. So as a guy who had written this book, once this book was in your hands, it's completely out of my hands right now. There's just very few things we changed to the actual story itself, a few words here and there, maybe we merged, but it was all up to you. For me, it came down to what I need to do is just let Paul do his thing. And every time you completed a panel, sometimes you'd say, hey, I have another panel, I'll send it to you. Sometimes I'd think you weren't even working on the book and you say, hey, I just finished 4. And I'm like, well, really? So I'm like so excited about this because I'm going to see 4 panels today. Right. So, but here's the thing that I want to share with you. The hardest part for people that are creative like you and me, but the hardest part is to kind of let go of the reins and just say, do your thing and don't try to micromanage and don't try to overlook. But for me, partnering up with you has made that such an easy thing. It's made me understand the value of truly having the right person in the right position. Yes. Because I never had to say, Paul, do this, or let's do that, or you asked me for my opinion, but at the same time, I just trusted what you were going to come up with was going to be better than anything I could even offer. And I just want to share that with the listeners because I want them to know when you put the right person in the right position, the worst thing you can do is now try to control them. Yes. Just let them do their thing.
And, and I guess right back at you with that too, because, a lot of authors would have been very frustrated with the process that I took getting to this point. They wouldn't have been patient enough to say, okay, find the legs. Let's get the right character. Let's get the right story flow. Let's get the right mood. And you were so accommodating as far as letting me kind of get there, as an artist. That, I mean, again, we wouldn't be where we are with this book. And I'm proud of what we've accomplished here because I do think it is something incredibly special. And I don't know that would have been accomplished with any other author.
Well, I appreciate you saying that. I can tell you, I have, even though my 2 youngest are now 10 and 11, I still have about 100, maybe 150 children's books in my office. They'll be handed down to nieces and nephews and when they have kids. And and things like that later. But this book here that you illustrated, and it's not because I have, it's my story and we did it together. This book here is the most beautifully illustrated book I've ever seen. The artwork is tremendous. And again, you brought the character to life. It's almost to the point where if you take the words out, you could still figure out what's happening from panel to panel with those bully corner dogs, which, by the way, I used to call them. The original story was the corner dogs. They were just corner dogs. And then one day, I'm looking at Facebook and someone refers to the mutts in the fire service, which is a common term. And I remember texting you saying, Paul, we need to change the corner dogs to the corner mutts.
Yeah.
And you were like, yes, because that's internally, everybody will understand that. Yeah. Similar to what our friend Andoni Castros would call the recliner snipers. They'll sit down and they'll tell you what you can and can't do, but they never leave their own corner. And that's what the corner dogs are. That's what so people understand that. You got these mutts on the corner that will tell you, you can't accomplish this. You're not smart enough, strong enough, brave enough. But they're not smart enough, strong enough, or brave enough to leave their own corner.
Yeah.
Their power is in taking your power away from you.
Exactly.
And this is a situation where this little puppy in this big city who had really nobody to really back him up except one kind word from a firefighter a little bit later in the story. But what he had was he had to find belief inside of himself that he could do it. And then he had to shut down the negative comments, and not just from other people, but the negative comments that he would tell himself.
Yes. Yeah, that's what I was getting ready to add, is the corner mutts aren't always external.
That's right.
A lot of times the corner mutts are within you, and you've got to be able to try to be able to silence that and accomplish whatever goal you need to, achieve. But I think in a lot of ways, sometimes the internal mutts are the hardest to navigate and the hardest to get over.
Yeah, I agree with that too. I have a very good friend who passed away, John Apar, who had this tremendous quote. She says, when your belief in you and your dreams is greater than other people's opinions of you, you will have mastered your life.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what this dog had to go through, is to say, I need to believe in myself. And he has the rocky moments, and he has the small victories followed by the large victories. And I don't want to give the book away, except to say this: if you have children, and I'm telling you, from the age of 2 and 3, where you'll read the book to them, to where they can read it to themselves, to where they're teenagers, they can read this book, or you can read this book to them, and they're going to take a lot away from the story about overcoming, about enduring, about believing in yourself, about believing less in other people's opinions of you, and the fact that anything's possible. And to that note, we end the book with some questions. Just this,
which is unheard of with children's books.
Right. But it's one of these things where a parent can sit down and say, what do you think would have happened if Sprinkles believed in what the corner mutts were saying about him? Like, that's one of the questions. And I think what a great catalyst for a conversation between a parent and a child.
And and I think this is, and I don't know whether it was intentional, but I think just with the way the story led the narrative and the story arc with this book, is that it's not just for children. No. Adults are going to get a lot out of this story as well. Because again, it's something like you even talked about. It's something we can all relate to, whether we've been in the fire service 1 year, whether we're a child, whether we're an adult. It's something we can all relate to.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
Anything else while you have it on screen shares, or anything else you want to show us?
No.
The process?
Nope, I think that's it.
Glad you did show me that. That's really spectacular. How you create that. My wife was just looking at the cover of the book again, and she's like, look at the detail, like on the fire hydrant, how there's parts where it looks like it's a little worn and rusted, and parts of the brick that have fallen through. And I'm like, well, that's what makes it exceptional. It's like you make it real.
Yeah. Well, I was hoping that the viewer would always, the second time around or the third time around, would see something new, something that they hadn't seen before. And that's kind of goes back to, I wanted the city to be one of the characters that just never gets mentioned, but it's always there.
Yeah, no, it's true. And now I have the whole book on a PDF, as you know, and I've looked at it several times on my computer, and I keep telling myself, don't look at it anymore. Don't look at it anymore. Wait till you get the book, because I want it to feel, it's almost like when I would draw when I was younger, I would hate everything I drew, and then I would back away from it. I'd come back 3 days later. I go, hey, it's not that bad. And for anyone that's out there who's creative, who wants to be a writer, who wants to be an artist, I want to talk to them for a moment, because like Step Up and Lead is that's been on the Amazon bestseller list in its category. It's been one of the top selling books in the fire service. I never knew if I'd ever even sell one book. The first time that I had written, the first version of that book that I had written, I didn't like it at all. I remember as I'm writing it, I'm thinking, this is really terrible. But what I've learned to do is write until I have a complete thing, then go back and kind of change some things, move some things around. But if I was trying to be perfect, I'd never get past the first page.
Yeah.
That's what I've learned about myself. So I wrote the whole book, and then I went back, and when I read it, after I completed the book, I thought, this is actually pretty good. I thought it was terrible when I was writing it.
Right. Oh, yeah.
But I'm thinking, this is actually a pretty good message, but I just need to change this and that, tweak this here and move this and take this story out and move. So I did some of that, just like I'm sure you do. But I want people to understand that, because people ask me this, Paul, they say, I want to write a book. They ask me for advice, and I tell them, I can't tell you how you should write a book. I can only tell you how I do it. I come up with an idea. I don't think about the finished product yet. I think about it section by section. For me, a leadership book anyway, a leadership book is a series of articles, in a sense.
Right.
I want to write an article on leadership traits. I want to write an article on how to mentor people. I want to write an article on this. And then it all comes together for a finished product. And then I could make it all flow. And for a novel, when I had written my screenplays, honestly, for me, like I said, it's a section of that story, maybe the first thing that pops into my head. Or when I wrote The Mentor, I legitimately opened it up and started writing from page 1 and didn't stop until I was at the last word. And it was a 30-day process, and the story just flowed. I don't know how it actually came to be that way, but for me, it was happening in my mind as I was writing it.
Right.
And maybe you could give advice for a young artist, somebody who says, I want to be an artist. I want to do what Paul does. And I have a friend, a kid who's on my son's baseball team. His dad's a friend of mine. He actually said to me a couple days ago, yeah, my son just told me he wants to be an artist. I said, what kind of artist? He said he wants to be an illustrator. I pulled up the PDF on my phone. I said, hey, look at this. A good friend of mine wrote this. One day I'll introduce you to him, or he drew this. One day I'll introduce you to him. Maybe he can give you some advice. And he was so excited. Yeah. So what would you say to a 12-year-old that says, I want to be an artist?
The one piece of advice I always give them is the one thing that I've always followed myself is to draw every day. Fall in love with the process of drawing. Yeah. It's like I said, and I don't joke about it, that drawing is like breathing to me, and it always has been. I fell in love with the process of creating something, that I could see something and whatever lightning bolt would come through my hand and go through that pencil, and sometimes it didn't come out the way I wanted to, but that was great. It was always something that I learned not to do the next time I would try to draw something, so it was always that just always being a sponge and soaking in the world around you so you can channel that creativity into something. My wife would come in as I was illustrating this. And like I said, I illustrated this sequentially. And it was funny because I actually sent you a text about, I think it was halfway through the book. And there's a moment where Sprinkles has his epiphany and he becomes, I don't know how much not to give away here. No. But anyway, so you probably remember the text. I got emotional.
Yes, I do. And
I'm illustrating this, and I finally illustrate this moment, and I'm like, yes, our little Sprinkles, and I'm getting excited, And it's just funny that you come up with these emotions that you weren't expecting.
Yeah.
And it's because as an artist, I immersed myself in that world.
And
that's what young artists have to do. You have to immerse yourself in that creative world and that creative juice and draw every chance you get. I know, and I don't know if it's something, the conversation I ever had, but I mean, my family, we grew up, we did not have a lot of money. We were pretty poor for the most part of my young life. And I always had very, very supportive parents, as far as, me wanting to be an artist. But buying art materials was something that really wasn't feasible for a lot of part of, of my life. And I would tear apart cereal boxes just to get to the empty cardboard on the inside to have some place to draw. Wow. A package, we would get a package or something, and I would cut things out and just save the paper or the cardboard so I would have some place that I could actually draw. You're a huge baseball coach. You love baseball. You love interacting with the kids.
Yeah.
But I had a lot of talent as a young athlete, but it was never anything that I was interested in because I would be over there. If I wasn't actively playing, I would have a stick and I would be drawing in the dirt. Yeah. And all the other kids would come over and go, "Oh, draw Scooby-Doo." And I'd be drawing Scooby-Doo, and it would infuriate the coaches because to them, I wasn't into the game. I wasn't, passionate about it. And they could see that there was actually talent there. It's just, it was nothing that I was ever interested in exploring because I was in love with this other part of life, that creative part.
But now, see, I love that. A couple things you said. First of all, just about the coaching aspect of it is that's what I try to teach kids right now is to find what you're passionate about and know I'm going to teach you the work ethic in baseball on how to be successful. Like the travel team that I've been coaching from the age of 7, they're 10 now. They're ranked number 6 in the state. That's a big accomplishment.
That's awesome.
And they're doing very well right now. But it's not about winning baseball for me. It's about if they say one day, I want to be an artist. And I tell them this, if you transfer the work ethic you've done to become a great baseball player to what you want to become in life, you're going to be successful. That's the goal. But the one thing I do want to say is when you mentioned in this discussion about how you became emotional at one point in the book, and if you remember, I said I became emotional when I reread the story after several years when my kids pulled it out. I truly believe that there will be people that when they're reading this to their children will become a little bit emotional too. And because they're going to want their child to be influenced by the story the way that we intend them to be, to where they read this and say, all right, I have all these outside forces in my life I have no control over, but let me focus on what I can control.
Right.
And if I just approach this with the right attitude and give my best effort, something great can happen. And that's part of the message of this book. And I'm so thrilled. I'm so excited. I can't wait till we share this with the world.
Yeah. It is just, again, we set out to create something special, and I feel that we have.
Amen.
We really
brother.
have.
Amen.
See, I'm getting emotional now.
Yeah. That's just because you know that a Yankee just pitched a no-hitter, right?
Yeah, well, the Tiger did it first, but nobody knew it. A text, seriously, a text about a Yankee pitching a no-hitter.
Well, it's kind of funny. Yeah, listen, I'm seeing it all over too about the Yankee pitched no-hitter, but I thought I'm seeing it because everybody in my area is a Yankee fan, so they're all sharing stuff about it. I didn't realize that was happening to you too. Oh, that's funny stuff.
Yeah, well, not everybody can. Not everyone loves misery.
No,
and so when you're diehard Detroit fans, because I love the Wings, I love the Lions, the Tigers, and my daughter. She, the funny thing is that she, when we lived in Tampa, the Yankees are huge in Tampa. I mean, they're bigger than the Rays.
I know. Well, they got their
the minor league team
preseason stuff there too.
So the Yankees are huge there, and my daughter grew up, and all the kids there were Yankee fans. Her teacher was a Yankee fan, and she would wear a Yankee hat around. and it would just, I was like, oh, the kid doesn't know anything. But now she's this Tiger fan, and I was like, oh, listen, what are you thinking? You should have stayed a Yankee fan.
Don't think the Yankee fans have it all figured out, because we're either Giants or Jets fans also.
Right. That's true.
And it's been a painful existence for us, at least these last few years.
Yeah. Well, as a Lions fan, we have our motto. Okay. We had 1955.
Oh, that's funny stuff right there. I'm like, what motto could that possibly be?
Yeah. Or, striving for mediocrity since 1955. That's another one. But
you had Barry Sanders, which was
oh my gosh,
remarkable. Now, hey, listen, he has been a lesson I share in every seminar. I don't know if you know this. Every seminar I talk about, act like you've been there before.
Yes.
And it only comes with training and preparation. And I talk about Barry Sanders. And I actually do classes for young athletes. I've been to high schools, I've been to grammar schools, and I even have a 30-minute program on my Facebook. On my YouTube channel, just my name, Frank Viscuso, for young athletes. It's called Step Up Your Teamwork. Actually, no, that one's called Step Up Your Game. And I talk about Barry Sanders in there too, just that here's a guy that every time he would score, he'd hand the ball to the ref.
Yeah.
And to me, that represented two things. He was saying, I've been here before, and he was saying, I'm going to be here again.
Yeah.
I don't need to rip off my helmet, do a 6-minute touchdown celebration, and try to get on the cover of a box of Wheaties. This is what I do.
Yeah, exactly.
And I love that about him. Love that about him.
Yeah. And the two athletes, at least in the modern age, that I've always respected the most for their on-field play was always Barry Sanders, of course, but Brett Favre. Yeah. Because he always acted like he loved the game.
Yes.
He had such a passion for just the game.
Yeah.
And even when he was losing, you always felt like there was part of him that still loved the experience of what he was doing.
Yeah. You know what? It's funny because when you said two athletes, I had no idea who the second one was going to be. And I've never heard anybody say Brett Favre and in the context that you just did it. But you are right. The passion, the drive, he wanted to win. Yeah, but he really did look like he was enjoying it out there too, and yeah, that's a pretty good analogy, pretty good. And I know this. You're going to be happy to hear this. You've probably seen the what is it, a 6 or a 10-part series, The Last Dance, about Michael Jordan. Did you
have not watched that?
I have. All right, well, listen, watch it. Everybody listening to this, watch it, because that is a phenomenal series. But you'll be happy to know they're now doing a 6-part series on Derek Jeter. So I'm going to make sure that
No. But like Barry Sanders, Derek Jeter fits in that mold for me.
Yeah.
He was that guy that you just knew, loved what he was doing. He'd been there before. He expected to win a championship that season. He expected nothing less than to win a championship that season. But he wasn't the guy out there doing backflips, doing the slow walk when he hit a home run. He was that guy that was just phenomenal.
What a lot of people don't realize about him also, I mean, they called him America's captain because it wasn't just about his team. He was a guy that did a lot for a lot of people, and encouraged them. And he was, we called him Captain Clutch, because when you needed a hit, and Derek Jeter came up to the plate at the most critical points in the most critical games, that guy got the hit.
Yeah,
he got the hit, and it was like, it was crazy. It was crazy to watch it happen. And so I've been to games in Boston. I'm going to tell you a funny story real quick. My wife she's 5 months pregnant with Frankie, and I'm out speaking in the Boston area. Somebody says to me the day before, I'm walking through Boston with a Yankee shirt on. Tell me I'm not thinking. I wasn't thinking. So I'm getting looks. I'm getting people saying stuff to me, and they're actually saying negative stuff to me, like a nice shirt, idiot. And I'm like, what? Like this. Right. And somebody says to me, are you here to watch the game? I said, what game? They said Yankees and Red Sox. I go, actually, I didn't even know they were in town. I didn't, because I was just there for business. And so I find out they're playing the next day, and we were just going to go walk through town the next day as well. So I say, let's go check out the stadium. So we go to check out the stadium. The game's about to start. We step out of a cab because I didn't want to drive over there. We step out of the cab, and the guy says, you want 2 tickets? I said, how much? He says, 100 apiece. I said, where are they? 11 rows behind Yankee dugout. I said, I'll take him. So my wife and I, we go and we watch the game. Now, there's two things that happened during this game. The first thing is, they know I'm a Yankee fan. I'm sitting there and I'm at looking at this green monster. I'm in Boston watching a game at Fenway. What a great experience. And I'm not going to say anything. I'm not going to cause any trouble because I know that these are arch rivals here. But I just asked them, I'm like, what do you think of Derek Jeter? And they're like, honestly, it seems like a great guy, but he's overrated. I'm like, I don't think he's overrated. I think, this guy's exactly what we need.
Right.
He went through his whole career without controversy. Who has ever done that as a New York athlete? Anyway, a guy gets up. And the score of this game was something like, and I'll tell you this, it was the last time the Yankees won the World Series. So it was like 11 years ago. The score was like 16-12, if I recall correctly. Everybody was hitting home runs. But every time Derek Jeter got up to bat, Paul, there was a guy that would stand up, went just about 4 rows behind him when he's in the batter's box, and he would heckle him very loud. And every time he's heckling him, saying things I'd never repeat on a podcast, I'd never want these words to come out of my mouth where my kids can hear it. He's heckling him. And then he'd turn around and he'd look for praise from everybody.
Oh, yeah.
And they'd all be like, yeah, you tell him. Jeter totally ignores him, gets up, he does his thing. His last at-bat, the guy gets up, he's doing it again. Now, at this point in the game, even the Boston fans don't want to hear the guy anymore. But he gets up and he's doing his thing. Paul, this is a true story. He's doing his thing. Jeter's up at bat. He's yelling. He's turning around looking for praise. He's yelling. Jeter fouls one off that goes up. The guy yells something to him, turns around. And when he turns around, this ball doesn't quite make it to the second level. It hits the wall there, bounces off, hits the guy right in the face. And it draws blood. He starts bleeding. And I'm like, that's the greatest moment in baseball right there. Everybody in Boston starts laughing at the guy because the irony of it.
Right,
the irony
exactly.
of it. And he's like, oh, you got me. And he's bleeding. And I'm like, that. If I ever meet Derek Jeter, I have to tell him that moment happened because I don't know if he's aware of it. It was funny, man. But I just remember thinking how what a great experience it was, first of all. And in life in general, this is something that I think about. Boston, Red Sox, New York Yankees, huge sports rivalry. But yet after 9/11 or after the bombings in Boston, both teams showed support for each other in their own way. When Derek Jeter retired, Boston showed respect for him. When great Boston players retired, Yankees show respect for them.
Right.
I wish we did more of that. And I wish we were in a situation where we didn't take sports rivalries so seriously and just said, look, we're all in this together. Let's just enjoy a good game. Yeah.
Well, there's a lot of life lessons there in how we take everything too serious, and, everything's got to be, and, you got to be one camp or the other, where, common sense is always somewhere in the middle. But, it's funny, that I've got a Jeter story for you too. Is that, and you'll appreciate this, is that in 2004, 2006, I was at the Tampa Tribune as the editorial cartoonist. Well, again, Yankees huge in Tampa. Well, George Steinbrenner at the time would always put on this large media event down there there's a big banquet every year for the media, for the dignitaries, politicians, that sort of thing. They would all come. There's this large banquet. They would bring down all these former Yankee greats. And all the current Yankee players would be there, suit and tie type event. And so one of the guys in our editorial department, his son worked in the Yankee organization. So he always got tickets for the entire editorial department. So I'm like, okay, this is a banquet, I didn't realize that this was a deal where we got to go in an hour and a half before the public who had tickets to this event and be able to mingle and talk with all these Yankee greats.
Wow.
I sat from me to this laptop and listened to Yogi Berra talk for at least 30 minutes, and I mean, and then it's coming from a Tiger fan, but that was just one of those moments where you're sitting there, you're looking at all these, these great names. And so, the banquet's getting ready to start, and they've got this large table at the front of the room, and all these Yankee greats are there. George Steinbrenner's in the middle. I think it was all the current players to the left and all the legends to the right, or something like that.
Right.
Well, this waiter comes in and he's got this huge pallet of dirty dishes. And he's trying to, you could tell that it was too heavy for him. And he was trying a way to try to set it down. And there was another dish in his way. And he was trying to use his elbow to push the other one out of the way to get it onto this cart. And Derek Jeter, who was sitting at the end of this table, gets up, walks off this stage. Nothing's really started yet. But he gets off, walks off the stage, walks up to this person and grabs the dish of dirty dishes so he could move the other one to be able to set it down.
Wow.
And just the humanity of being that Derek Jeter, that persona of Ali, because at that time he was a Yankee legend.
Right.
And to go, hey, there's someone in need. I'm going to go help them. And it's something as simple as, one of the people there that were probably making minimum wage.
Yeah.
That he just decided he was going to help. And that's the moment that I was like, okay, you know what? This is just one of those human beings that just gets it.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's
the stardom isn't gone to their head. They're not up there sitting going, they're not, or totally oblivious to what's going on. They saw something, they saw somebody in need and they went over to help.
Yeah.
And I have always respected him. If not for nothing else, I mean, the baseball field greatness aside is that moment.
Yeah, no, see, and it's funny how those little things can make an impression on people.
Yeah.
You mentioned Yogi Berra. I got to give a shout out to another buddy of ours, Jim Silver now. Mm-hmm. When I was out in Missouri speaking a couple years ago, we went to dinner on the Hill. The Hill is the Little Italy, maybe the last Little Italy, true Little Italy in all of America.
Right. There's a great documentary out about that too.
Yes,
I haven't seen it yet.
It is awesome.
Is it really? I'd love to see it. I keep forgetting about it.
Yeah, check it out. But we went, we had dinner on the Hill. We've done it a few times, I think 3 times, but this was the first time. And he says to me, hey, Yogi Berra grew up on a street, one street over. I said, are you kidding me? I said, I didn't know that. I said, yeah. He says, there's like this little monument, little plaque in front of his house on the ground saying, Yogi grew up here. I'm like, I'd love to see that. I said, Joe Graggiola also across the street, 2 legendary ball players, both in a Hall of Fame, were played stickball in the street with each other. I'm like, that's unbelievable. He goes, we'll go see it. So when we get done eating, it's nighttime, it's dark. We pull around the block. I get out, I'm taking a photo of this little plaque in front of the house. And a woman walks by with her dog. Jimmy says, are you Yogi's niece? She says, actually, I am. She goes, can I help you? He goes, this is my friend Frank. He's from New Jersey. He's a big Yankee fan. And I was just telling him, that Yogi grew up here. She goes, oh, come on in. I'm like, we sit on the porch with Yogi's niece and she's telling us stories about him. And I'm like, this is awesome. This is now a very interesting thing happened that night was she goes, when you get back to New Jersey, go visit him. Go visit him. She says he's really not doing that well. So, I mean, if you want to meet him, now's the time, but go visit him. And I said, I would love to. That night, somebody broke into the Yogi Berra Museum, which I think is in Montclair, New Jersey, that night that we were out there and stole a lot of his memorabilia. And I thought, well, I don't want to go visit him now.
Right.
Because she was saying, go visit him there. I don't want to go visit him now. And he passed away shortly after that, which was terrible. But what a great man. And who knew we were going to talk about baseball instead? But we always ended up
I knew we did a baseball somewhere.
Yeah.
That's a given with us.
Well,
which is another project.
Well, I was just going to say, there might be someone listening to this that may be in the publishing industry and maybe in children's books. And I'm gonna give you a little tip right now. Paul and I have an idea for another young reader's book that has to do with the sport of baseball, with his illustrations and my life lessons as being a coach of almost 30 teams. And that's all I'm going to say.
Yeah.
But maybe through this, we kind of find that missing link of how we're good, because that's not a fire related book, but where we're going to end up finding a home for that.
We will.
I know we will. I don't even question that for a moment, but I like putting things out there.
I just draw. You're the marketing guy. I just draw.
I don't know if I'm the marketing guy. I don't know. I'm just, I'll end on this. Somebody once asked me, hey, how do you get all your speaking gigs? And I mean, because you're very active. And this was a guy who's pretty active himself. And we were having dinner, and I said, I'll tell you the truth about it. I don't know. I said, it's all word of mouth. Mm-hmm. I don't advertise. I don't send out mass emails or anything like that. I am active on social media. I said, but here's my take on it. I go where God wants me to be, and I say what I feel I'm supposed to say at that particular moment. And I have learned to be okay with that without having to have all the answers and having to figure it out. Because when I was that guy that thought I needed it all figured out before I took that first step, I was miserable.
Yeah,
I really was. I was miserable because I realized I'll never be ready. I'll never be ready to write a book, never be ready to teach a class, never be ready to do anything in life, never be ready to be a chief officer in a fire service. I just have to take that step and then figure it out as I go. And that's the story of my life. And maybe somebody can take some value away from that.
Yeah. Well, and it's funny that you say that too, because, we talked about the corner mutts in your own head. And that was a lot of the criticism I was giving myself in just trying to illustrate this book was, you've got to be perfect. You got to know all this stuff. You haven't done enough research. You have to check all these boxes before you can even put down one line.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until I just started drawing, which I know to do, but I couldn't convince myself that I just needed to start the process and trust that I know what I'm doing and that it'll get there, that it all started to come together.
Well, it did come together in a way that's more beautiful than I could have imagined. So I want to thank you for giving me this this opportunity to work with you.
And thank you for giving me a phenomenal story that had impact. I'm excited.
Me too, brother.
I'm excited.
Well, thank you, Paul, for coming on.
You're welcome. Thank you.